Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield audio podcast.
Let's talk about guitars. I'm sitting in Nashville after all, and the symbol of our baseball team and of much of our city and much of our music is the guitar. So let's talk about guitars. And I'd love to talk to you today about guitars from a fan perspective, from a guy who can play like 4 cowboy chords on the guitar, from my love of guitars. We could talk about Segovia, we could talk about Vince Gill and Eric Clapton and all kinds of great guitar players. But I need to talk about something else related to guitars, and that is the federal raid on the Gibson Guitar Company that occurred on August 24th of this year, 2011. I know that probably you've come across this in the press. If you don't know about it, it's a pretty important moment. And so let's discuss it for just a moment. Let me give you a little bit of a briefing, and then let's talk about the implications of this, because folks here in Nashville, where I'm sitting right now, are absolutely enraged about it. On August 24th, a hot day here in Nashville, Tennessee, federal officers, dozens of them, armed to the teeth, including SWAT-looking types of clothes, black and helmets and all the stuff you see on television and CSI and all that kind of thing. Some of them with automatic weapons. Raided both the Nashville branch or the Nashville factory of Gibson Guitars, a company that's been around for over 100 years and made some of the greatest guitars ever. And they also raided the Memphis plant for Gibson. And you can imagine now what this is like. I mean, a guitar plant, is nothing really sexy or high-powered, or, there's not armed guards at the door, for heaven's sakes. These are what in the trade they call luthiers, which means people sitting there working on, workbenches, essentially. Some of them are cutting out the shape. Some of them are sanding. Some of them are, coating and finishing and all that. And you can imagine what it looks like, all the pieces of unassembled guitars laying around, and that's what they create. So, this is not exactly a violent bunch. It's not like you've raided the Black Panthers here or the KKK. So they raided Gibson Guitars and shut them down, completely shut them down. And by the way, I should tell you that Gibson has increased its employee base by 600 people since the recession. So they've been working very hard to be a great American company. Of course, they've got this great, more than century long old history. And they are a beloved company, as you can imagine, certainly in Nashville for what they produce, but around the country because they're an all-American company and produce an all-American product, the guitar. The reason is what I think inflames so many people. Let me give you a little background here. There's an act called the Lacey Act. Now, let me say right up front that everybody I know is in favor of the Lacey Act, and it actually impacts you whenever you go through airports. The Lacey Act was passed in 1900. It was proposed by a Republican, which is not a big deal, except that it just plays, I think, prominently into our story down the road. And essentially, it was to keep the resources in other countries, endangered species and so on, from being purchased and sold in the United States. The focus of the act was primarily endangered species in the U.S., but then it also began to involve the animals of other countries. So I'm just making this up. Let's say that a certain kind of dog or a certain kind of llama or a certain kind of lizard or snake was endangered, let's say in Venezuela. Well, then, of course, you couldn't bring it into the U.S. Now, there are, health and biological reasons for that, and that's where you often get stopped at the airport. But then there are also things that are just simply illegal because we're trying to protect endangered species. We're trying to respect the environmental laws of other countries. Again, all of that, I, as a conservative, and I know not all conservatives agree with me, I'm completely in favor of. I'm sort of an environmentally concerned conservative. I obviously don't want to encourage the hunting and killing of endangered species. Certainly don't want them traded across national borders. All of that's just fine. So in 2008, the Lacey Act was expanded by Congress to include foliage. And the whole idea here was, of course, if you have an endangered tree in a country or an endangered plant, that country has the right to protect it. And so we don't want to see it being sold across international borders. And so this is what began to involve Gibson Guitars in this whole process. Obviously, Gibson Guitars uses wood, and so if they're using Brazilian rosewood for a guitar, and then Brazilian rosewood is deemed to be, endangered, then maybe they use a wood from India or some other country. And of course, we respect that. We don't want to, contribute to the, to entire species of plants or animals becoming obsolete or dying out completely. The problem here, though, is that Gibson had been doing everything that it could to observe the laws. The problem is, in some countries, the laws regarding endangered trees or animals are very, very murky, and it's hard to know. So the way that the Lacey Act reads now, and again, it's not a problem with the idea of protecting endangered species, foliage, what have you. The problem now is that the U.S. government is in the position of enforcing laws from other countries that are unbelievably murky and unclear. So, for example, Gibson got raided largely because it was buying a kind of wood from India which the Indian government itself had approved. But the laws are so murky and the international registers are so unclear that when that wood was discovered coming in through the Houston port to Gibson, it was detected, and thus Gibson was raided. Now, I have to say, first of all, that this is not, as far as I can tell, pro-environmental protection versus anti-environmental protection kind of issue. One of the congressmen I work very closely with is Marsha Blackburn. She actually protected the Lacey Act in 2008 from a veto by George W. Bush. She voted to override. And yet I was so proud of her because when Barack Obama made his job speech here just a week or two ago, she actually took as her guest the CEO of Gibson Guitars, because you understand a little bit of the hypocrisy here, and I'm not saying it's personal with Barack Obama. Here he is making a speech about conditions that the federal government can help with that will improve jobs, improve the economy, and improve business in America, and yet the federal government has raided a company which is not only an American icon, but which has done everything it can to improve jobs. And they've rated them on the basis not that they're trafficking drugs or doing something horribly illegal or run by the mafia, but they might have the wrong kind of wood in their bridge, and they're not even aware of it because the laws are so murky in India. So this was a decision on the part of the EPA and other organizations of our federal government to do a SWAT type of raid on a bunch of craftsmen, for heaven's sakes, when this could have been handled another way. And so now, even at this moment, weeks later, Gibson is still shut down, still not functioning, and Marsha Blackburn is desperately trying to draw attention to this. Others are trying to draw attention to it, and it is a really sad moment, not only in the Obama administration but in American corporate history. Let me just say clearly that we need to be environmentally concerned. We need to protect endangered species. We need to protect the environment. Nobody wants chemicals being dumped in rivers and trash everywhere. And absolutely, corporations have been polluters and have been done things that they ought not have done. And we're grateful for those who police that. But we also know that many times environmental concerns are used as an anti-corporate, anti-business tool. That this has been established in courts for years. I'm not even saying that's what's going on here. I think what's going on here is a little bit of tyranny, a little bit of federal intimidation, a little bit of really inappropriate use of federal force against a bunch of craftsmen and a great American company. What needs to happen is that the Lacey Act needs to be modified, not defanged, but modified, so that it's clear, and also so that the federal forces and federal policy is not somehow dependent upon clarity regarding endangered species in other countries. We should simply draw our own boundaries based on what we understand to be the needs of other countries and their desire to protect their resources, and not make federal forces somehow subject to foreign laws. Because here was Gibson attempting to obey the laws, and still they were raided. So now we have hundreds of people out of work. We have a great American company shut down. We have guitars not being made in a city that, is almost built on the guitar in a sense, and that we want to have built on the guitar, not just because I live here, but because, of course, we want the music industry to thrive. We want it to employ people. We want the art side of music. We also want the business side of the music industry as it still survives. And all of this has been destroyed, or at least temporarily suspended, because why? Because we're not clear about the nation of India's policy about a certain kind of wood that their own government approved the export of. So if we're serious about jobs, we're serious about a pro-business environment, we're serious about helping American industries, we can start by not raiding them. This could have been handled by 3 accountants walking in the front door of Gibson and sitting down with the CEO. This did not involve a raid. It did not involve need to involve automatic weapons. It did not need to involve this kind of intimidation, and it did not need to involve the shutdown of a company in 2 cities with hundreds of employees at a time when we're already dealing with an economic recession. So it's time for some wisdom and some moderation. This does not, by the way, have to be a conservative liberal fight. Everybody, I think, is agreed on the principles. Nobody wants to see Gibson destroyed, and nobody wants to put the EPA and federal marshal forces at the behest of the Indian government. So there's a better way to do this and make cooler heads prevail.
This Stephen Mansfield podcast was brought to you by the Mansfield Group. Find us at mansfieldgroup.com.